Hi, everyone, and welcome to the third session of the Poets Talk Politics series that I've been running at the University of Porto since a couple of months ago. Today, as before, what we're going to do is we're going to start with a reading. In this case, the poet that we've invited is going to do a walkthrough because the poems that he prepared for us are interactive. So we're going to start with a reading, and then we're going to talk about a bunch of things that are related, or there are implications that the poem opens up for us and whatnot. In this particular case, we're going to focus on the environment, right? So Eugenio Tisselli, I'm going to introduce him later. He's an eco-poet, and he works in digital literature, that works with digital, and in this case, the poem that we're going to be talking about is a video game, right? So what you can expect to hear us debate in this session is the relation between, for example, the digital and the environment, which is normally not something that we talk about a lot, right? The environment and materialities is usually seen as something quite separate from this, the bunch of topics that we're going to be talking about: algorithms, digital, the internet, and whatnot. I'm going to introduce then all of the people in our panel. First, the main guest is Eugenio Tisselli. He practices programming as a form of writing and writes poems imagined as sets of algorithmic procedures. Standing upon this hybrid field, he has developed writing tools such as MIDI Poet or computer-assisted poetry. He has published his work using different media formats and has presented it at international festivals, talks, and exhibitions. He slowly uploads most of his pieces and texts to his website, http://motorhueso.net. Also say that Eugenio is based in Mexico City, in case you don't know him yet. And so welcome, Eugenio. Then we have my friend and colleague from UCD, from Dublin, Katharina Kalinovsky. She is a poet and a Marie Curie Fellow at the University of Cologne. She has recently submitted her PhD in creative writing and English philology, conducted in collaboration with the University of Kent and University College Dublin. Situated at a creative, critical edge, her research explores eco-poetics and forms of expanded eco-translation in the Antropocene. Her work can be found in the Journal of British and Irish Innovative Poetry, Magma, Green Theory and Praxis Journal, and the Irish Poetry Reading Archive. And then we have my two Portuguese colleagues, one of whom is actually working with me here at the University of Porto. That's Bruno Ministro. He is a junior researcher at the Institute for Comparative Literature at the University of Porto. And he received his PhD in materialities of literature from the University of Coimbra. Since 2017, he is co-editor of the digital archive of POEX, hosted by the University Fernando Pessoa. In recent years, he has been collaborating with several projects and events related to modern and contemporary literature, mainly on the subjects of experimental poetry, electronic literature, and other hybrid genres. His current research concentrates on intermedial poetics and politics, working at the intersection of such areas as literary studies, media studies, and cultural studies. And his website is hackingthetext.net. And then finally, we got Ana Marques, who develops research in the areas of literary theory and media study, with a focus on the effects of computation on literary forms and practices. She was an FCT scholarship holder in the doctoral program in materialities of literature at the University of Coimbra as well, having dedicated her doctoral thesis to the study of aesthetics and politics of algorithmic poetics. She currently works as a research fellow at the Portuguese for the Center for Portuguese Literature. So welcome everyone, and I'm gonna pass the ball to Eugenio, who's gonna read and present his work. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Joao, and also thank you, Katharina, Anna, and Bruno. It's a real pleasure to talk to you today. And it's also a real pleasure for me to be presented as an eco-poet. I think it's the first time for me, which is really exciting because I'm trying to move a little bit away from electronic poetry, which is the area that I've been working on for many years, maybe more than 20, or I lost count. So I'm sort of trying to think about other topics without entirely leaving this digital domain that we're actually all quite enclosed in this domain, especially now in the pandemic. But I'm sort of trying to think about a broader, let's say, set of actors, which would be an ecosystem, including digital devices, which are an important part of ecosystems. But I'm focusing more on live creatures and beings, on the things that are around us, whether living or not. So I'm trying to move beyond this little space, these little screens, these little rectangles, which constrain our lives, and I'm trying to do so with poetry, which is let's say the medium, the tool, the format, whatever you want to call it, that has given me the opportunity to explore different areas. So I like the term eco-poet. And I was invited by Joao to present one specific piece, and I suggested also to present another piece. So these pieces are entirely in the digital domain. So as I said, I'm still working on that field. In fact, as Joao said, I'm a programmer, so that's probably the only thing that I can do properly in this world. So I stick to programming because it's what I do, it's what I like. But it's also a space which allows me to explore these thoughts and these political implications of living in this age, which some people call Anthropocene, other people call Capitalocene. So maybe we can also talk about that. But I'm just going to jump into the pieces that I want to show you. The first one is called The Gate. And I thought about this piece actually as an essay, which contains little fragments of poetry, but it's an essay in the sense that it tries to develop an idea and tries to sort of not come to a conclusion, but actually to sort of put on the table certain ideas, specifically about coexistence, about spectrality in this age of ecological catastrophes. And I thought that the format of a game would be the most appropriate to sort of communicate these ideas, rather than writing an essay, an academic essay, or a non-academic essay. I prefer to make a game. So this is a piece from 2017. And then I'm going to present a more recent piece called Amazon from 2019. So if you allow me, I'm going to share my screen and also with sound. So let's go. I'm going to start playing around with these pieces. First, we're going to jump to The Gate, which is, as I said, a game essay, and I'm going to walk through the game. And I'm sorry, I'm going to sort of spoil the game because I'm going to try to finish it and come to the final stage of the game, which not many people arrive to this stage because it's a little bit difficult to, maybe some of you, if you have played it before, then maybe you arrived at the final stage, but I'm going to do that. And so, of course, you can try this at home. This is my webpage. And in this very black and very impenetrable webpage, you can find the link to the gate somewhere here. So I'm going to just open it. I'm going to let the soundtrack play so that you can hear the sound. I'm going to just explain a few things about the game. and I'm just going to play it for the next maybe 10 minutes. And you can just listen and read and hopefully enjoy. So here we go. While it loads, I have to say the gate was done, as I said, in 2017. And they're very concise instructions. Find the gatekeeper and ask for pass. Listen to the creatures before they disappear. Learn to speak their words. Leave the forest before the temperature becomes unbearable. So here I am, in the middle of a forest. The temperature is slowly rising, the red instead of the blue. There is a voice which says, haunted by the spirits of a million dead computers. Your feet are bleeding, don't stop walking. We really don't know where that voice is coming from. So I'm just going to explore, try to see if I can find the creatures. And here is a gorilla. So I'm going to go close to this creature, and I'm going to listen to this creature. So the gorilla said something. I'm going to try to listen a little bit more. So the gorilla is sometimes speaking, sometimes remaining silent. And now I'm going to try to memorize the words of the gorilla. Moon, mon boom, which of course don't make sense to me, at least, because I'm not a gorilla so far. So I'm going to try to find the gatekeeper and repeat these words and see if the gatekeeper can let me pass through the gate.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Can you somehow balance a little the sound, the ambient sound with your microphone, because it's really high sound.
Yes, Bruno, thank you. I just silenced the soundtrack so I can just...
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. No, it's okay. Sorry about this noise that you heard.
It's so perfect for a performance, I think, but maybe
okay.
So for to hear you.
Okay, so just to summarize, I just found the gorilla. I just heard some words being spoken to me by the gorilla, and I found the gatekeeper. I'm going to repeat the words of the gorilla to see if the gatekeeper can let me pass through the gate. So the gatekeeper says, go and learn the words that the creatures speak, then return to me. If you have learned something already, press space. So I'm going to press space because I just heard something. And I'm going to try to repeat them. I think I'm going to try again. Let me see. Yeah, it was slightly wrong, but I was successful in repeating the words of the gorilla. So the gatekeeper says, now I must learn from 2 more creatures because before I can pass through the gate. So I have to search for more creatures around the forest, learn their words, and let's see if I can pass and go to another level. So I'm just moving around, searching for some creature. And there is a fox. Okay, let me go near it. And I'm going to listen to this creature. Okay, this one is a little bit difficult to memorize. Let's see if I can memorize what the fox just said. It would be like alpha, ow, which is, of course, a non-human language, which I'm trying to learn and repeat. Now I'm moving back to the gatekeeper and see if I can repeat these words successfully. And if you can see the screen, it's becoming sort of red. You know, this little indicator means that the temperature is getting hotter and hotter. So I must move quickly before the temperature becomes unbearable and actually kills me. So I'm going to try to repeat the words that I just learned from the fox. And let's see, it says arfa, au. Yeah, good. Now I need to find one more creature. And of course I know where they are because I programmed the game. So I'm going to move quickly to the next creature. But I need to be very careful because actually there are some creatures which are murderous. If I try to go near them and try to listen to what they're saying, maybe they're hungry, maybe they're anxious, and they will probably try to eat me or kill me. So I just found a bear, which is actually a very dangerous creature. So I'll try to be careful and just listen to the bear and see what the bear can tell me. Okay, I have some words from the bear. It's gorg, grrr. Yeah. So I'm not going to listen any further because the bear might get angry and actually attack me. And the voice is still there as I walk. The black clouds won't go away. They hang heavily without rain. I don't know if you have experienced this in very hot environments where you see black clouds and it looks like it's going to rain, but it actually never rains because the ground is too hot. So that's what is happening, and that's what the voice is telling me. This is happening to me right now. Sound enters through the cracks of your skin. This is also something that is happening, and I don't know why. I don't know how the sound enters through the cracks of my skin. So I think as I reach the gatekeeper, I can also see that the fox has become extinct. And slowly, the animals, all the animals that I'm meeting, they are becoming extinct. So I must also be quick and find the animals before they become extinct. So I'm going to try to repeat the words of the bear to the gatekeeper. And here I go. It's gorg. No, I think oops, let me try again. Okay. Gorg, grr. Yeah. Don't recognize those words. Try again or leave. I think I had them right, but I probably made a mistake there. So things are getting a little bit difficult. Let me see if I can find the bear again or some other creature, because I need some words to actually pass through the gate. And the temperature is becoming hotter. I can see the screen becoming red. There is the voice that still is talking, and there's the wolf. And the wolf is also a very dangerous creature, so I'm going to try to be very careful and listen. And the wolf says, "Ru, wa." Okay, let me see. Let me try again and see if the wolf and I can make this sort of link through a language which I cannot understand, but I can repeat. And here's the sound part of language. The language is also sound, and that's important. It's not only meaning. We tend to focus on meaning very much, but sound here is essential. So I'm going to try to repeat the sounds I heard from the wolf. And let me see if I get it right. Yes, the words of the wolf. Your task was very dangerous and seemed impossible to accomplish, but you have succeeded. You may now pass through the gate. So what lies beyond the gate? Let's see. You have passed through the inner gate, the gate of human language. By letting non-human voices enter your body, you have opened the pathway towards new forms of coexistence with strange and beautiful creatures that inhabit this planet. Perhaps life can be finally recomposed by following this unknown path. So this is the end of the game, and it's the end of the essay. And as I said, it's a game about coexistence and spectrality, in the sense of all of the animals, even myself as a character, are alive, but at the same time we are dead, because there is a looming catastrophe that's closing in upon us. And even if we are alive, we can consider ourselves already dead. But something happened before actually this massive dying. I learned the language of different creatures. I formed allegiances with all sorts of creatures, with a fox, with a wolf, and with a gorilla. And of course, the gatekeeper is also my ally. And this sort of resonates with what Donna Haraway speaks when she says that we must form allegiances with all sorts of creatures in order to stay with the trouble, in order to stay together and to navigate the complexities of the Anthropocene, the Capitalocene, the Cthulhucene, the many scenes that are on the scene right now. So this is the gate, and I just reached the final stage. I invite you to play it at home. It's there on my webpage, as I said. And if you allow me, I don't know if I still have some time, I would like to show you another piece. Okay, Joao said it's okay, so let's go ahead. And following in a very similar topic, at least it's similar in my head, it's part of the same themes that I'm trying to think about. There is another piece called Amazon. So I'm going to show it to you. I'm coming back to my webpage, and there's a section down here near the bottom, which is called Algorithmic Politics. And there are different pieces that I've made with this idea of what is algorithmic politics is something that I ask myself and try to answer through these pieces. So I'm going to show you Amazon, the English version. And basically this is the piece. The thing is made out of code. Here in the middle of the screen, in the central part of the screen, you see a fragment of code which combines HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, which are maybe the three main languages of the World Wide Web. And there are some instructions. So this piece is actually something that you have to do. You can read it, of course, but there is something that you have to do. So the instructions are as follows. Copy the following code, paste it on a plain text editor, save it as amazon.html, double-click the file so that it shows on your browser, and watch Capitalocene unfold. So let's do that very quickly. I'm just going to copy this code, which is actually a little hard to understand even for programmers because of the way in which it's written. So it's a code that it's a little bit cryptic. It's very difficult to anticipate actually what is going to happen here. So I'm going to open Notepad. I'm going to paste the code, and I'm going to save this file, maybe on my desktop, and I'm going to call it amazon.html. I just save it, and I'm going to quickly go to my desktop because that's where I saved the file. Here I can find the file. It's called Amazon. And if I double click it, it will open on my browser, and we will see what happens, what the code does, because the code will be executed when I open this file. And as the code is executed, I'm going to read you a little bit about this piece, which are some thoughts behind what it is that you're going to see. So let's give it some time, and let me read a little bit for you. As you can see, the code of amazon.html is written in a compressed format, often called minified, which makes it very difficult to read. There is an important reason for this. I wanted to convey the idea that the code of this piece was something condensed and obscure, like a tiny peel whose contents become evident only when it's swallowed, or like the DNA of a virus enclosed within a protein cloak. Code that spreads, apparently insignificant in size, easy to copy and paste, yet cryptic and immanent. To accompany Amazon.html, I wrote that code is the vector of human desires. But by creating an extremely condensed piece of code, I wanted to suggest a complementary idea, that humans are vectors of the code's desires. I believe that code has agency beyond its mere execution, and that it is based on its desire to proliferate, a sort of code animism, if you will, that may also be observed in human languages and other technologies. In our daily lives, we help code proliferate, not just by copying, pasting, or executing it, but by actually performing it ourselves. I'm not necessarily thinking about computer code. Consider the Homo economicus behavioral model, for instance. According to this model, we are supposed to evaluate all of life's events in terms of costs and benefits, of rationalizations and optimizations. To what extent is this code present in our daily actions and decisions? Perhaps much more than we realize. I would like to suggest there is a relation between the negative effects of such codified behavior and the Capitalocene predicament, which I understand as a sort of environmental artificial intelligence shared by humans and machines alike, that parses and renders the world as numbers. Everything in the world can thus be measured. If we can see the universe in a grain of sand, as William Blake would have it, then we might say that every fragment of code carries within it a very specific vision of the cosmos. A cosmos entirely composed of numbers, where everything is knowable through a process of numerization. What happens when everything can be translated into the abstract, non-ambiguous language of numbers? Do we become numbers ourselves? Numbers form series, and therefore they can be infinitely interchanged. What happens to life on Earth, to humans and non-human beings, when they are considered as no more than interchangeable numeric units? To me, this is the core question of the Capitalocene predicament. My piece, Amazon.html, seeks to suggest that we carry code as much as code carries us, and that such reciprocal relation emanates a cosmos modeled after the numerical logic of computation. The negative effects of such fierce mathematization of life, as Franco Berardi would say, are, among many others, the destruction of forest ecosystems for the sake of economic profit. So this is what you see here. It's an abstract representation of a forest that at first slowly, then very quickly turns into numbers. And this is actually what is going on in the Amazon forest. This is what is going on in different forests and forest ecosystems around the world. So that's what I wanted to show you. Thanks for watching and listening. And maybe I'm going to stop sharing my screen because the forest has now entirely been turned into numbers. So there's nothing more to see.
Thank you very much, Eugenio. Those are really, really interesting. So I hope we can spend the next hour or so, just talking about what they, what they mean, but what we can get out of them for a broader debate about the environment and eco-poetry and whatnot. So I'm gonna ask Katharina to go first, if that's okay. Katharina, can you ask the first question? Is that okay?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much, Eugenio, for sharing this work. It's really interesting. I actually played the game yesterday, and as you said, it's quite difficult if you don't know where the animals are. I have a couple of questions, actually. I think what I want to ask you first is, can you talk a little bit about your concept or your idea of language? Because you kind of talk about non-human language, but then obviously the animals also use the human language system, and then you also talk about code as language, which I find really fascinating. So and there seems to be this possibility in language, but also language that is inaccessible to us. And then at the very end of the game, I think you say something like, we pass through the gate, through the inner gate of language. So there's kind of this idea of a boundary, but also possibility. So I'm just really, really interested in what you think of language, and especially like organic language and then artificial language like coding and numbers. So that's what fascinates me. So I'm just really interested to hear what you think about that.
Thank you very much, Katharina, and thank you for trying to play the gate. I know it's difficult, but well, I felt the need to make a difficult game so people might want to return and try again. So hopefully, well, actually, language is central to what I try to put into my poetry and my work. The idea of language. What is language? What is human language? What is artificial language? Why is the language a gate? Why is it an inner gate? And I mean, it's a biblical thing. We can read it in the Genesis that we as humans have given names to all the creatures that exist, the living and non-living creatures. Animals, insects, plants, even oceans and mountains. We give names to these creatures. And in a way, we sort of recreate the world to our measure. We use our language to recreate the world. And so we sort of tend to use human names to describe everything that exists. And of course, we have to do that. There's no other way around it because we are humans. When we communicate, and I want to tell you that there is an insect, that there is an ant on the table, I need to call the ant an ant. I cannot say something that is outside language. So language sort of becomes like an enclosure. And I'm thinking about Wittgenstein here, that the limits of my language are the limits of my world. So we limit the world using language. But this limitation of the world creates a boundary, creates a gate that allows us to name everything that exists, but also prevents us from actually communicating with the existing forms of life in a way which is outside language. And my question is whether that is even possible or not. So I wanted to play with this idea that animals are also saying different things. And this idea comes a little bit from a theory, an idea by Bruno Latour, when he speaks about the parliament of things. And that if we want real planetary justice, if we want real environmental justice, we need to learn to listen to other beings and to listen to what they're saying in their own terms, not try to translate them all the time, but actually to listen to what they're saying in their own terms. So I wanted to play around with this idea that the bear is telling me something, that the gorilla is telling me something which I don't understand, but I have to respect just like it's being spoken. I'm not trying to translate the words of the gorilla into something that I can understand. I'm just trying to repeat them. And by these other qualities of language, which are also sound, of course, here we are using text. But if I memorize the text, I sort of translate it into sound in my mind. So I have to reproduce the words of the gorilla as a sound or as an image. It's very interesting how at the cognitive level, how language is absorbed. It's actually absorbed as sound or as image. And in this case, I absorbed it. I tried to absorb it as a sound. So my hypothesis is that by repeating these words, we sort of come a little bit closer to these animals. We repeat their language without necessarily understanding what they're saying, but we're sort of letting the language inside our bodies. We're letting other languages inside our bodies, and therefore our bodies become transformed. So that is for let's say animal languages. I wouldn't even dare to say that animals have language. I'm just not sure about it. I don't think it's an easy answer whether animals have language or not. But about artificial languages, I think that's also an interesting question that you asked, because I'm thinking about different theories of language, which sort of try to okay, if we think about the limits of language, and here I'm going to draw a little bit because I'm probably not very good at explaining, but let's say that this ellipse is the limits of language, right? And I draw it as an ellipse because maybe we have two extremes. On one extreme, we have like the mathematical formulations, mathematical equations, code, which are very precise. If you know coding, you have to be very precise, and you cannot tell the computer, oh, draw some characters on the screen. So you have to say which characters on which position of the screen, or you can make a random function that gives you some characters, but you have to be very, very precise. And therefore, coding is very close to the language of mathematics. And that's an extreme of language. But at the other extreme of language, you have poetry. So these are the two extremes of language. And why are they two extremes? Because when you think about mathematics, it's very precise. But when you think about poetry, precision is not an issue. We're not asking what does the poem mean or what is the poet trying to tell me. It's every word can open to infinite possible meanings and infinite possible interpretations. So if we think about the relation between the form of language and its interpretation, here we have the two extremes, mathematics and poetry. So another hypothesis, probably which is more present in the Amazon piece, is that our language, our human language, is becoming more and more mathematical, and that poetry is increasingly difficult to understand because we're not ready, or maybe once we knew how to do it, but we lost the knowledge of how to deal with ambiguity. And we try to rule out ambiguity from our lives, to rule out multiple interpretations of something. So for me, these are very interesting things to explore, how ambiguity and precision are at two extremes of language, and how code and poetry help us to explore each of these two extremes. So I don't know if I answered your question, but I tried my best.
Yeah, thank you. I think that was a great response. Especially, I'm really interested in the idea of opposing quantifiable language of coding, and then you have poetry, which I always think is very much language that is unquantifiable. So I think that's really interesting. Yeah, that kind of, I would absolutely second what you said there.
Thanks, Katharina and Eugenio. Can we move to Anna? Maybe can Anna now ask a question?
Yeah, sure. First, one little question about the game. Is the sound your own? The music?
Yes.
Okay.
I also try to make a little bit of music.
All right. I liked it very much, but Bruno was right in asking you to put the sound on because we couldn't understand your words. I'm reading my questions and choosing the one that is closer to this, to the problems, plural, to the problems of language and computer-generated language, human language. But maybe I will improvise and leave the questions that I have thought of before. I shouldn't be doing this, but I'll do it anyway. So I was thinking about John Cayley recently proposed the idea of grammalepsy in the context of what we understand to be a language, thinking about computer-generated language. And he says that computer-generated language in itself ontologically is code, right? And that it only becomes language when it is deciphered, read, or listened to by human animals, by the only animals that have language in the sense of verb language, because there are lots of other communication systems which function to communicate, but they are not language in the sense that they have the cognitive level of operation that language has. So what do you think about this question? If we follow John Cayley's proposal, then computer generated language only becomes language when it is decoded, understood as language by humans. And given the fact that online, where most of written language is nowadays, a lot of that language isn't actually read by humans. I mean, we are kind of in a field of numerical information, of code. It's like a simulacrum of things in which we think that this is language, and we assume it is, and we talk about it as if it was, but it isn't actually. So this confusion that collapses categories regarding elementary things in our life that have to do with communication and the perception of the objects of the world, in this case, linguistic objects, this creates some kind of confusion. And yeah, that's it. How do you see this problem? Or maybe it's not a problem at all. I see it as a problem because it raises some confusions in my mind, but maybe it's not a problem.
Thank you, Anna. I think it's a fascinating question, and I'm trying to think around it, and I'm taking some notes as you speak. I very much admire John Cayley and his work, theoretical and also as a poet. But in this particular topic of grammalepsy, I don't know if I fully agree with him that code only becomes language when it's interpreted by humans. It feels a little bit anthropocentric, but okay, that's a feeling. But let me try to think a little bit deeper about this. And language is a cognitive capacity. We sometimes confuse language and writing and other features of human and non-human communication. And language is a cognitive capacity. Writing could be described as a technology. And code is, we could say that it's more on the side of a technology. It's a form of writing, and therefore it's a technology that may or may not happen with cognition. I mean, you don't really need cognition to produce written language and to use it as a form of communication. But then the question goes to this very fascinating but also obscure place of whether computers have cognition and whether computers have a mind and computers have intelligence. And the whole artificial intelligence movement leads us to believe that, yes, computers have intelligence, they have a mind, they have cognition. I personally think about it in two very different ways. On one side, I think that computers are more persuasive than actually intelligent, in the sense that they produce written language that leads us to believe that there is some thought behind it, but it's just calculation. It's just statistical calculation. So we might say computers are not intelligent. They don't have cognitive capacities. They just produce written language, which is writing, which is, as I said, it's a technology. But then I also think about something that the philosopher Reza Negarestani said in his book, Intelligence and Spirit, that the mind is not a thing. The mind is what it does. So the mind is pure epiphenomenon. He does not ask what is the mind. He just says the mind is what we observe as a mind activity, as having mind. So this is also incredible. It's an incredible line of thought, because it leads to it can allow us to think that things have a mind, that animals have a mind, that glasses, that pens, that computers have a mind, because they behave in such a way that makes us think that they have a mind. So even if we don't actually know what is the mind, we know what the brain is, but we don't really know what the mind is. And if we don't know what is the mind, but we still we observe mind-like behavior in other beings, then we might say that other beings have minds, and therefore they have cognitive capacity. So if we open up this line of thinking, then we could say that computers have cognitive capacities because their behavior tells us that they do. And in that way, they would have a mind, and in that way, they would be capable of producing language. But of course, this is pure speculation. And I like to think that computers, when they talk to each other, they sort of simulate our cognitive processes of communicating. We receive symbols, we sort of associate those symbols to meanings, which can be variable, and then we process those meanings, and then we reply again with symbols. And it's a symbolic exchange in which meanings are corresponding to certain tables in the code or certain arrays of neurons in the brain. So I think that, yeah, code is language, regardless of whether humans are present or not. That's what I would say.
Can I just say something very quickly regarding the line of thought that you were exposing? Noam Chomsky argues that the difference between human language and computer-generated language is that, or between human intelligence and computer cognition, is that we produce language or utterances that are appropriate to circumstances in a non-determined way. And computers produce language in ways that are also adequate to circumstances in a way that is predetermined by humans. So this determinism of computer cognition should be taken into account when we think about these questions. Yeah.
Of course, I mean, we can always turn off the computer. And there is this second order, let's say this will of cognition that I think an interesting device to think about this is the figure of the meta author that was proposed by Douglas Hofstadter, when he speaks about if the computer produces language, for example, there is always a human behind the computer who programmed the computer actually. So if the author of the language that was produced is the computer, then the meta author of that language is the human. So the meta author allows us to think about this double layer of cognition that is behind what we see in the digital world. But maybe computers are becoming more and more autonomous. Maybe they're going to be able to program themselves very quickly. So that's going to become even more confused and complex.
Bruno, you want to go now?
Yeah, sure. I want to talk about ideological media and so on, but I will pick on the meaning first, the language and the meaning making process that Eugenio was telling us about. Eugenio, you have stated elsewhere that you have attempted to write against meaning by focusing on the materiality of language. And even in your initial presentation, you were saying that meaning is not the point, right? Considering that you often write computational works, let's say, and bearing in mind that the digital media is usually perceived and described as immaterial, what can you tell us about your engagement with the materiality of language in this context? Let me put it in from another angle. how do you see the supposed opposition between the material and the so-called immaterial? And more, how do you try to engage with the materiality within a context of immateriality, or let's say a different kind of materialization, dematerialization and rematerialization, if it makes sense to put it that way? And regarding this matter, I was wondering, I don't know, but maybe it would be good if you could talk a little more about your work with the generative systems and degenerative and regenerative ones as well, to quote the title of two of your works.
Thank you very much, Bruno. It's such a big question, and I'll try to answer as best as I can. When I think about the materiality of language, I think about very, very, very basic things which are perceivable readily, like the form of the letters, the color, the shape, the size. I mean, these are very, very, very basic things. It's almost like thinking about the basics of when you learn how to write when you're little. You learn a very material process, which is grabbing a pen and drawing an A and a B and a C, and the different colors of the ink and the size, and that's what I'm thinking about. And it's probably very, very banal, but I don't think it is, because written language has a material basis, whereas oral language, it also has a material basis, which is air and particles, but let's think about more perceivable materiality, which is the written language. So here I'm thinking about visual poetry and all the works of visual poets who actually used letters and words not based on their meanings, but actually based on the shapes and the colors and the sizes and the orientations and the typography of words, which was a very interesting exploration. I mean, in Portugal, there's a very rich tradition of visual poetry, very beautiful works, and also in Brazil and many different parts of the world. And that's one very basic aspect of materiality of language. When we think about the digital medium as a language-based medium, as you said, we tend to think about this medium as being immaterial. But I've been sort of looking at it for some years now. And of course, there's a hidden materiality which we don't see. Of course, there is a computer, there is a keyboard, there is a screen, and they are made out of plastics and etc. And inside the computer, there are all kinds of metals, there is silicon, there are all kinds of materials. And then if we think about all the devices, I'm actually writing a very short text about the environmental impacts of ICTs, which I might share with you later. I'm still writing it. But the impacts of ICTs, the material consequences of ICTs on the environment are huge. They're larger than the airline industry, for example, the air transportation industry, which is around 1% and 2% of all global greenhouse emissions. And it is estimated that the impact of the ICT sector on global greenhouse emissions is almost 4% of all the shares of those emissions. That's one side. We can just measure the impact on CO2, for example, and of course the energy that it takes to produce a computer, the usage of that computer, the replacing of the computer, the disposal of that computer, that all of that is material and energy, and it creates an impact which is not very favorable on our environment. But then you might say we're moving to green energies. Wow, great. So we're not going to have CO2 emissions, but we're going to have a lot of mining. Lithium, for example, which is the new gold, the new oil, and everybody's rushing to find more lithium and to grab the land where lithium is lying. So that kind of materiality is the kind of materiality that we don't see, because if we see the screen, it's pure light. And if we write on the screen and we use words written on the screen, then I just turn off the screen and those words vanish into nothing, right? So they appear to be immaterial. That's one thing. The other thing is about meaning. Meaning, we could say it's immaterial, although it can have material consequences, but meaning itself is something that is not material. However, symbols are material. Symbols are something that we can exchange through sound, through writing, through objects. Objects, sounds, writing become symbols. And we attach meaning to those symbols. And what I've been trying to do to generate symbolic exchanges which are meaningful but don't carry meaning, which is a very tricky thing to think about, because whenever you use symbols, you're already talking about possible meanings. And what I try to do in my work, mostly in generative pieces and degenerative and regenerative pieces, is to actually produce a symbolic output that points to a meaning which is different from the symbol that that can give rise to the meaning. It's a little bit difficult to explain. Maybe later I can very briefly show these pieces to you. I don't know if we have time, but the idea, of course, is to play with this tension between materiality, immateriality, whether the meaning is tied to the symbol or whether this link between meaning and symbol is itself so immaterial that we can completely replace it and mold it and transform it through poetry. That's what I would say.
Thank you, Eugenio. I'll ask you a question myself now. I was intrigued by, I mean, I'm really into video games, by the way, right? Which is why I was really interested in you know, seeing this project of yours. The only other, I don't know that many, actually, that many video game poems, right? I wrote something on a very interesting work by Alejandro, I forget his name.
Crawford, isn't it?
Yeah, Alejandro Crawford. Thank you, Bruno. Thank you. And so very interesting, and it's also about ideas of nature and wilderness and whatnot. So I wanted to ask you, right, since you're a poet originally, or fundamentally, what I wanted to ask you is, what does this genre or medium, what are the affordances of this medium for poetic composition? It's like, what are you able to accomplish using this genre or this medium that you are not able to accomplish with a poem, right? I was thinking here, and then just a couple of things, to start the discussion, maybe, that, for example, there is a time constraint, right, in the video game, right? You as you said, right, like, if you take too long, you're gonna die, right? And that's definitely also carries certain meanings, right, that you can mobilize for the global significance of the poem. And also, I mean, if you take too long, you're gonna die. If you don't find the creatures in time, they die, right? And that in itself has meaning as well, right? So that's what I wanted to know, like, given that these are two constrained media, right? Both poetry has its own constraints, right? Very particular constraints that we are used to, and that poets try to frustrate in particular ways. And in video games, it's the same, right? Like, you're sort of expecting to find a particular thing. And I would say your game is actually kind of linear, right? It's not very, it doesn't really mess up with all of the expectations that you might have about what a video game is supposed to do and whatnot. So I wanted to see what you have to say about, like, constraints and what they allow you to do in this medium.
Thank you, Joao. I think that I decided to create the gate. The first thing that came to mind is that I wanted to create a space. So the idea of the space came before the idea of the game. And I wanted to create a space where you could explore and interact with different creatures and sort of get lost. And actually the act of getting lost would be part of why I wanted to have a space. And it's true what you say, it's in terms of constraints and thinking about what other games can do, it's quite a linear game. You have to do this, then you have to do this, then you have to do this, and then it's over. And if you fail, then you lose, right? So it's quite linear. It's not very much open to contingency or to surprises. Once you read the instructions, you already know how to do and what to do, and you just do it. So the idea of the game and the constraints were not the most important for me. What was important was the space. To create a space, to create a sort of immersive way of reading in which you could actually just move around and do nothing waiting until the temperature rises and then you die. But that's one thing I actually like. You can just walk around without finding any creatures, without learning anything, and then you just wait for your death. And that for me already holds meaning already, because if we just go around as we sometimes do and try not to overcome certain limitations that we have, then it's like just waiting for death. It's just like waiting for something to happen which will wipe us away. So all the possibilities, which are not many, but there are a few within the game, all of those have meaning, and those meanings sort of aggregate into what I wanted to transmit, which is the idea that we're here, we're facing an unknown space, we are specters, we are surrounded by specters, half-life, half-dead characters, and that we can still do something about it. And in that sense, it's a bit of a hopeful game, in the sense that you can just walk around and do nothing, or you can try to find the other, to approach the other. Yeah, I'm thinking about Rimbaud. Maybe it doesn't make a lot of sense, but I am the other. I don't know if I translated it properly, but to find the other, to actually find the other, to let the other's language penetrate my body, to actually internalize it and to repeat those words, that's already doing something which is not, of course, not going to stop climate change. It's not going to stop global warming, but it might stop or transform the way in which we relate to other beings and to the planet itself. And so, as I said, the game is a little bit of an excuse, but I just wanted to create the space in which you could move and explore and find or not certain things.
Thank you very much. Let's try to do then a second round of questions and maybe try to finish in 20 minutes or so, just so we have a more or less manageable video that then people can watch later. So Katharina, can you ask then a second question? And we can start with you again.
Yeah, sure. You kind of stole my question on form and genre and the essay as a trial and as a wager, as Joan Vitala would phrase it. But I'm trying to articulate another question and I'm trying to condense it. But what you just said about we can also just walk around and see and wait until we die kind of reminded me of, since you mentioned him already, of Latour and how he talks about loops and circulating until we recognize the consequences of our actions. So I thought that was really interesting. But the space that you create, I'm thinking about the trees, because for the first minutes that I was in the game, I tried to talk to the trees, and then I obviously realized that they don't speak. So I'm kind of interested about your concept of environment, because from an eco-critical perspective in the game, the environment is kind of turning into background again, which eco-poetics is trying to foreground environment and kind of breaking hierarchies between trees and animals and so on and so forth. So I don't know if that's not really a question, but maybe you can just comment on that, on the environment and the trees and hierarchies. And yeah.
That's a very good question, I think, and thank you for asking it, because I also thought about the role of trees. And there are, I mean, I'm using emojis, different figures of trees. And of course, it doesn't really make sense, because you find trees together that do not belong together in a forest ecosystem. You find cacti, and then you find pine trees, and of course it's very, I mean, you can see them together actually in some parts of Mexico, for example. But leaving that aside, the trees form the space, so actually they are very important. They are the ones who constrain your movements. And perhaps what I was thinking is that, let me see if I can put it this way. The umwelt of the human is closer to the umwelt of the animal, and it's much more farther than the umwelt of the tree. So of course, I could think about a game in which you can sort of try to communicate with trees, and that would be really interesting. But because of the limitations of the ideas that I wanted to transmit, I just included animals as speaking creatures. But this does not mean, of course, that trees cannot, so to speak, communicate with us. It's only it's much harder to read what trees are telling us. So you're right in pointing this out, because it might seem that the trees move into the background, and I'm again just putting or giving more importance to animals. And you could also say, well, where are the bacteria on the ground, and where are the many different beings? And of course, we have to think about all of these things. So I just concentrated on larger animals. But of course, trees are the way I see it is that they give you the possibility of moving, or actually stop you from reaching certain points. So they have a role, but it's not a very apparent role, not a very, let's say, active role. But yeah, it's a great question. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Anna.
So in your work, you have consistently called attention to the ecological impact of digital technologies for a long time now. You have also published a manifesto explaining why once in the past you decided to stop creating digital literature. What made you return to this field? What kind of emancipatory potential do you think that the digital has for progressive politics?
Wow, that's a great question, Anna. Thanks. I love your questions. I love every question. So I could just spend hours with you, and it's a great pleasure. I decided to try and come back to creating works of digital literature, because when I said that I was stopping and would no longer do digital literature because the devices that I was using were loaded with conflict minerals and all of the environmental problems with that I just described a while ago, I was so shocked that I just said, well, I don't want to just go on making poetry knowing that in the other end of the world, or maybe even closer, there are people who are actually dying because the resources that are being extracted in order to create those devices are killing people, are killing rivers, are killing forest ecosystems, are killing animals. So I don't want to be complicit in this destruction. So that's why I said that I wanted to stop. But then it's a dead end, because all of technologies, not only digital technologies, but all of the technologies that we hold in our hands, in some way or another entail the extraction of materials. All technology has a material basis. So I realized this, I really hadn't thought about it very carefully. So I started thinking really what it means to have technology, to need technology, to actually live in this planet. So I decided to go back and use the medium that I had always used, which is the computer, the digital medium, but with a very different mindset, which was not producing things for the sake of producing things, but actually something which I took from Bernard Stiegler, which is sadly, he passed away last year. He was a very interesting thinker. And he proposed this idea that we think about technology with a pharmacological attitude, that we think in terms of doses, in terms of, okay, technologies, not only digital technologies are sort of like a medicine, like a pharmacon that allows us to live a better life in this planet, but above the dose, then instead of helping us, it starts to harm us. So the question that I try to always ask, which is a very difficult question, and it's almost impossible to have a clear answer, is what is the dose of digital technology that allows me to have a better life, better in terms of more full, not more full of opportunities for doing business or advancing my career, but actually to communicating with you, for example. I mean, this is a great opportunity. You are in Porto, I'm in Mexico City, so if we didn't have these technologies, we wouldn't be able to speak to each other. So this is great. But where is the line? Where do we draw the line and say this is too much? This is and perhaps this is already too much. I mean, as much as I love talking to you, this video streaming is emitting a lot of CO2. We've been living through more than a year of a pandemic, and we're glued to the screens, and I just want to get out and go to the trees and the animals and lie on the grass for months, for example. So my body is actually telling me that I'm overdosing in technology right now, but I cannot escape from it. So for me, it was the recognition that we are all inside this paradox. We are all inside the paradox of needing technology, but actually having technologies that are harmful for the planet. So what I try to do is use the technologies in a responsible way. I'm not trying to produce pieces of digital literature every month. I just try to produce something very sparsely. When I really think that I have something to say, then I try to say it with an economy of means, not spending too much energy and resources, and try to say it with as simply as possible. And that's what has happened to me.
Bruno?
Well, that's wonderful. And my question is about the paradox. I love paradox. So, yeah, we live, I'll be brief here. Okay. We live in an algorithmic culture today, right? We are surrounded by automatic processes of tracking and deification, which means that all the subjects and objects and practices are transformed into digital data or numbers, as you said. We need only to think about our digital footprint on the web and so on, our daily experience, more and more connected to the online these days, and we don't even notice that anymore, except after a pandemics. As we have seen in Amazon.html, you demand that users and readers copy and paste the code to run the work, creating consciousness about that process, right? Instead of provide it as it is, I mean, to run it directly on a web server. There is an effort that you ask for, right? In a paratext to this work, and in your initial presentation, you declare that code, and I quote you, code is the vector that transforms your desires into data Would you like to expand this idea briefly, of course? And my question is also this one. By using algorithmic processes in your works, sometimes web-based algorithms, are you somehow fighting against the algorithmic culture? Do you see it this way? Is it a paradox? Is that something that you have in your mind when you start creating new work, or is it something that just comes naturally, so to speak, as natural or as normal as in the omnipresent algorithms surrounding us today?
Thank you, Bruno. I think, yeah, we need to use algorithms to fight against algorithms, in the sense that only by using algorithms, maybe in a poetical way, I'm not saying that I do, that's what I'm doing, but if we try to use algorithms in a poetic way, we can show how algorithms actually are constructions. And we say we are living in an algorithmic society, we're ruled by algorithms, but I would say that it's not fully true. It seems like we are living in an algorithmic society, and we're increasingly, briefly a while ago, I just said our language is turning more and more code-like, mathematical-like. But at the same time, it's not. And it really depends on where you look. And it depends on whether you can make place inside your mind for the paradox, which means that, yes, there are algorithms that are guiding us in our daily actions and decisions, but they don't entirely run our lives. And this is especially apparent when you look at places like Mexico, where there are many, many indigenous cultures which have survived for hundreds of years after this, well, you know, the processes of colonization. The indigenous cultures are still there. And I think that one of the ways in which they have survived is by allowing the paradox to enter their culture. And these cultures are the fundamental, as one of the fundamental aspects of these cultures. For example, I'm thinking about the Mije culture in Oaxaca in Mexico. The fundamental aspect is the relation between humans and the earth. As the Mother Earth, it actually sounds like a cliche, but it's actually something that is lived in everyday life. But at the same time, they use computers to revitalize their language and to connect to other people, and they're very active on the internet. So it's not a paradox for them. And they live in both worlds, and that is, I think, one of the keys to survival. To actually don't think, okay, if I'm living in an algorithmic world, then I have to forget about the physical, organic world. Or the other way around. If I'm living in the organic world, I cannot think about the algorithmic world. So it's not a matter of or, it's a matter of and. So I'm living in an algorithmic world, but I'm also living in an organic world, and I see plants and birds and different animals around me. And I need to create a more healthy relationship to those beings. So I do use algorithms to point this out, that just to point out how silly and fragile and unstable algorithms are, because we tend to think that the algorithm is telling us what to do and they run our daily lives. And it's really not true. The media like to tell these stories because these stories sell a lot, I think. And people get excited about algorithms, and they think about, oh, in the future, we will be ruled by artificial intelligences. But the organic world is still there, and we need to not forget about it, I think. So poetry and algorithms, I think it's a nice way to underline the idea that algorithms are something which is interesting, which is useful maybe, but it's not as big as we sometimes tend to think.
Thanks, Eugenio. I'm gonna try to ask my question very quickly, and so we can try to leave in 5 minutes. One thing I really thought was interesting was how your work resonated with very interesting conceptual work by, for example, Christian Book or Eduardo Kac. So, for example, Christian Book's Xenotext Experiment also kind of has the same, or departs from the same premise that we are, kind of guided by or impelled by a code, right? In his case, the genetic code, right, is what's driving humanity to self-destruction, right? This is what the idea that he explores in his poem. And also Eduardo Cac, a Brazilian bioartist, also fools around with that idea that you mentioned before of the relation between naming and biblical times on Genesis, right? The idea that language is, or human language is a language of control, right? And you as you said, you try to go against that, to try to by pitting against that poetic language, right? And in the case of your work, it seems to me that, apart from it being digital, it being a video game, it's also sound poetry in a way, right? Because because of the way that you are asking readers to engage with the language of the animals, right? In the language of the animals that we have to sort of interpret and master in a way, or not master, but we have to understand it, is gibberish, right? It's just noise, and the whole soundtrack, right, that you had to get rid of is noise, right? So this idea of communing or experiencing or exposing yourself to noise, right? Can you say a little more about the significance of this and what you see as this pursuit of the right words, right? The words that we need to know to enter the gate and whatnot. What does this mean in terms of also, as you were saying, right, like what you wanted to accomplish with this work is having us communicate with animals. Like what or how can we accomplish this in a more like effective manner? And what are the implications and the, where can we go from there? I would say.
I don't know. I mean, that's a quick answer, of course. But what I think is that it's very true what you say, that if we think about sound poetry, I think that gives us a very strong idea of where could we go and at least try to see what happens. Because sound poetry, it works with the sonic materiality of language. So again, we return to the question of materiality that Bruno was posing before. And I think that we have overlooked the materiality in favor of meaning. But if we try to resonate with other beings, it doesn't really matter if we understand exactly what they're saying. If it's more like a feeling of being resonant with other beings. I think that's the only way in which we can actually try to think of a possible communication between a tree and a human, between an animal and a human, between a river and a human. There are many artists who have tried to sonify natural beings, sorry for using that word, but let's say non-human or more than human beings. I think it's a better term. And sonification is one possibility, but sound poetry is also another possibility. And maybe if I listen to a dog barking, I could try to repeat those barks, and then there's a feeling that will arise inside me. And I won't probably know exactly what it means, but the feeling might be there and might be a tool to resonate with that animal or other animals. I'm not saying that's the answer. I'm not saying that's the key to the future and we should all start barking and meowing and chirping like birds. But then why not? I mean, if that is a way to bring us closer to those beings, then why not try it and see what feelings arise inside us? I think that's a kind of poetry that I would like to see and hear, especially in the future.
Thank you so much. Eugenio has to run, so we'll end here. Thank you so much to all of you and to Eugenio for coming.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for your beautiful questions. And really, it was an honor to think together with you. It was a great pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much.